All right. Continuing on, I told you that Hillary Clinton is going to be running against a very specific person, one other guy up for the job of presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, and that man's name is Barack Obama. He clinched the Democrat nomination, totally bypassed her completely. He himself was also a senator. He was a senator in Illinois. Now, some of the stuff that came out during their battle against each other, Hillary Clinton pointed out that Barack Obama may not be born in the United States. So she started this thing called the birther movement. She is the one who first said, I think we need to investigate his background and make sure he's truly an American citizen. Now, when she left the competition, wow, the election cycle, when she bowed out and let him take over the Democratic nomination, a Republican who was running for office picked up that idea of, we need to find out the truth about his origins. And that was Donald Trump, who was also kind of getting his feet wet during this election to see if he would be a potential candidate for president from the Republican side of things, because he was really angry at Hillary Clinton for the way she was running her Senate seat in New York. That's how he got involved. He was angry at the Democrats for the way they were treating New York City. He was a New Yorker, born and raised, and he built a lot of stuff for that city. And so he was really angry with how New York was taking a nosedive under Democratic leadership. Not kidding. So he's the one that picked up the whole idea of we need actual proof about whether or not this guy was born in the United States or not. Now, for some reason, Barack Obama refused to release a lot of really pertinent information that most other people have no problem releasing, like his grades from college, his birth certificate, for one thing, his tax returns. I mean, he didn't want anybody to know really anything about him except for what he said about himself. And one of the things he promoted about himself was that he was a constitutional professor. He was a professor of constitutional law. Turns out that wasn't true. He had actually spoken at a couple of colleges in constitutional law classes, but he himself was never a professor of constitutional law. But he was running against a Republican named John McCain, who was an Arizona senator. So we have 3 senators that were starting out in the race, but now on the Republican side, this Arizona senator. He was a former Vietnam veteran. He was a prisoner of war during Vietnam. For the first time, we'd have 2 senators actually competing against each other for the presidency. The problem with McCain for a lot of Republicans was the fact that he was very, very moderate, almost to the point where he was very liberal. He was actually more Democrat in a lot of his stances than he was Republican. And that made people a little uncomfortable. If they were going to vote for a Republican, they wanted a definite difference between the Republican and the Democrat candidate. So they chose a running mate for him who was much, much more conservative than he was. And they chose a woman. She was the governor of Alaska. He faced, when she joined the McCain team, she became the more conservative of the 2. And the press went after her so hard, specifically because she was a woman. Seriously, that's why they went after her. They tore her down because she was a woman. Now, John McCain faced a lot of obstacles in his run for the presidency. He was 72 years old, very old, which means that by the time his first 4 years are done, he'd be 76, really old. He was way too moderate in his political stance to be a strong Republican candidate. And there was a diminished popularity of the Republican Party because of George Bush. At the very end of he was kind of torn apart there at the end of his time as president. Barack Obama easily won the presidency in 2008. He was a good speaker when he had a speech in front of him. He did have a tendency to do the thing that even Reagan did, who was called the great communicator. But when he was given a speech, he could deliver it really, really well. Weirdly enough, the president who had the most composure when it came to giving off-the-cuff speeches and memorizing their speeches like verbatim was Bill Clinton. He has a really high IQ and is able to memorize things really quickly. So even Americans who didn't agree with a lot of his standards or his political stances, things like abortion, because he believed in abortion up to birth, same-sex marriage, they were not happy about some of his political stances, but they were very happy to have a Black president. So for me, for instance, I personally did not vote for Barack Obama, but I was glad that we had a Black president because I wanted to see real change in the United States of America. We felt like we were finally at the point where we could get to post-racial America. We have a Black president. This should be breaking down the walls, and people should be really working together to create a more significant melting pot in the United States. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Racism is actually going to skyrocket during the Barack Obama presidency. Obama had inherited a financial crisis from Bush, and Bush gets all the blame for that, honestly, because it was during his presidency, people began to sell their overpriced homes they had bought earlier. So many homes sold at once that the values dropped. People were no longer able to pay their mortgages. And it got to the point where homeowners lost their homes because their loans themselves had been bundled and sold as like junk. And so their mortgages went way up when their mortgage got sold to another company. The other company raised the mortgage and people couldn't afford to pay that anymore. But what really got people angry at Bush during this whole crisis was he spent money to bail out the banks. Banks did not have the cash they needed to fulfill their financial obligations. And in 2008, Bush used the Troubled Assets Relief Program in an effort to bail out the banks. And that angered people because they lost their houses and the banks got bailed out. The banks that foreclosed on them got bailed out. And people were like, wait a minute, how did I lose my house and then the bank gets help? That made people really angry. Then in 2012, the economy was collapsing even further and further because of so many new taxes being written into law. There was a nationalized healthcare issue. There was increasingly strained race relations because, unfortunately, the Obamas became more about we need to fix white America because of the race issues. And anytime anybody says anything negative about Black Americans, they must be racist. He was really pushing for this whole idea of don't trust the police, which the police were like, come on. So there were increasingly strained race relations that were becoming major issues. Mitt Romney in Massachusetts promised to bring change, but he himself was also very, very moderate, and he was not the clear-cut difference. And so Obama was reelected. In 2009, President Obama signed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. This is going to sound really familiar to you because it's the exact same kind of thing that was done by FDR. So FDR, who had the Great Depression and then extended the course of the Great Depression by starting all these government programs, that is the lesson that Obama is going to take away. And he's going to do that again, even though it was a failure the first time it happened. He's also going to use this as an idea to get more and more socialist ideas into the American public. So this purpose was to create government jobs and spending with the hopes of jumpstarting the economy. But when taxes are raised to pay to put somebody else to work, other people have to fire those who are working so they can pay their taxes. So it's actually going to cause the unemployment rate to go up every time. The result was a slowing of the economy. Exactly what happened when FDR did it. Exactly. Many Americans were left unemployed and they were receiving government assistance, a socialist program or social program. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, was a national health insurance policy that was provided by the government. In other countries, there were promises that I don't know what the other countries are there, promises that Americans could keep could opt out and keep their own insurance companies were proven false. That was something the president himself said. He said, I promise, I pledge that you can keep your own insurance and your own doctor. No one's going to force you to change doctors. But what they ended up doing with the Obamacare, they basically compelled other insurance companies to cover multiple things that they didn't need to cover for that specific person. See, the way an insurance company works is they will interview you as a person and decide what you need. Okay, this can be a problem when it comes to like having a pre-existing condition. Okay, but let's say my sister, for instance, had really, really great insurance. She had high cholesterol, so she knew she needed to have that covered. So her company understood that, and they didn't cover her for everything, but they realized that she needed to be taken care of there. She needed to have other things that she had covered. Her eyesight was covered. Her hearing was covered. All of that was covered. And then when Obamacare came in, her insurance company basically had to drop her. And they said, sorry, but we not only have to cover all the stuff that you pay us for, but we have to cover stuff you don't even need, because we have to cover that to make up for other people who need those services. So people were paying for other people to be taken care of with their insurance pay. And that was too much for insurance companies to handle. It was too expensive. And so they ended up going under. So the pros and cons of the Obamacare system. The pros were it would slow the rise of healthcare costs. I don't know how much I agree with that, because anytime a government gets involved in any industry, the prices always go up. Always. It would cover 10 essential healthcare benefits, but not everybody needs all 10 of those healthcare benefits actually covered. Coverage for pre-existing conditions. That was actually a very important issue. Children can stay on their parents' health insurance plans. That's kind of a joke, because they're considering people to be children until they're 25. My youngest son is 25. He's married, has a kid, makes more money than I do. Come on. The cons were they raised the income tax rate because they have to pay for it somehow. It taxed those who didn't purchase insurance. So if the insurance is too expensive for you to purchase from the government, you could pay a fine where you got no coverage whatsoever, but you still had to pay the government for the fact that you didn't have their insurance that you couldn't afford. People chose to pay the tax rather than pay for the coverage because it was cheaper to pay the fine and go without any kind of insurance. Pharmaceutical companies had to pay extra to close what they called the donut hole gap, so that people who couldn't afford the pharmaceuticals could afford them. So the pharmaceutical companies are paying more money out. Okay, Obama appointed several judges and 2 Supreme Court justices during his first term, Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, both on the liberal side of the spectrum, but they were going to be a good balance, because it's a good thing for our Supreme Court to be balanced between liberal and conservative, because you want both sides of those representing the nation. Obama believed that the main problem in the Middle East was conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. He pressured Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to conform to a list of demands. Can you imagine walking into somebody's house and saying, you know what your problem is? He did exactly that. You can see Netanyahu is really impressed by this. So he's like, you know what? To solve the problem, here's a list of demands you should do. Okay. The result was a decline of support among Jewish Americans, because there were a lot of people in the United States who are Jewish, and they're looking at this guy and saying, what are you doing? That's our homeland. I mean, this is our homeland, but that's our, ancestral homeland. You don't know anything that's going on over there. It's like you're not supporting us at all. The majority of Jewish people in the United States are actually Democrats, and he lost a lot of Democratic support as a result of this. During his campaign, Obama stated he did not believe the United States should have gone to war with Iraq. And by 2011, U.S. troops were withdrawn from Iraq. He withdrew them, and people said, are you sure we should withdraw? Because we saw these insurgents coming in. He's like, oh yeah, no problem. Let's get out of here. As soon as the United States withdrew, the insurgents flooded in. Okay, going on. In 2011, Obama signed a new START strategic arm reduction treaty with Russia's prime minister. Dmitry Medvedev. It agreed to drastically reduce the number of missiles and nuclear warheads in both the United States and Russia. Deja vu all over again. Now, almost as soon as this was signed, okay, not as soon, but, very shortly, because this is 2011, he's signing this. By 2014, Russia was threatening a country called Crimea, okay? It was actually part of the Ukraine. But they were actually going around Ukraine and invading this piece of land. They wanted to make it their very own. So President Obama issued a warning. He said to Russian troops, you need to get out of there or we're going to come after you. And the Russian troops said, yeah, whatever. And they went in anyway. By 2016, it was time for Barack Obama to step down as president. And so the Democratic Party was looking for candidates. And of course, Hillary Clinton is waving her hands in the corner going, me, 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 me. She had served as the Secretary of State during Obama. Unfortunately, she made some really big mistakes while she was Secretary of State, and she was replaced as Secretary of State during his second term by John Kerry, the guy who ran for president. It was the Heinz Fortune guy. Okay, so in 2016, Hillary Clinton is going to run again for president. Her biggest contender is a fellow Democrat named Bernie Sanders, who has been a senator for like 40 years by that time. He was in the lead through much of the campaign, even though what he was saying was really scary because he was a full-on, I'm a socialist, but the stuff he was saying was absolutely communist. Okay. Hillary ended up winning the Democratic nomination and everybody went, that's funny. It looked like he was leading this whole time. And it turned out that the Democratic Party gave her the nomination without the necessary votes. Later investigations discovered the Democratic National Convention gave the nomination to Clinton. They would rather have her as president than him as president. He was too scary even for them. As Clinton campaign continued, all these scandals started coming to light. First of all was her absolute refusal to come to the aid of the ambassador and the staff of the American embassy in Benghazi. That resulted in the death of 4 people. The ambassador and his staff talked to the, I want to say State House, and that's not right. She was Secretary of State. They talked to the State Department. That's what I'm trying to say. Talked to the State Department. They said, look, things are going bad here. We need to be taken out right now. We need to be evacuated. You need to send help immediately. She refused to send them help. And when she was asked, she was like, I didn't really think they needed it. Those 4 men died. The actual American ambassador in Benghazi was tortured for hours. He was raped repeatedly before he was beheaded. He went through a lot of garbage in his last moments. But she absolutely refused to come to his aid and to help the staff in the American embassy in Benghazi. As soon as it came to light that the embassy had been destroyed or had been invaded, she went on TV and told the American people that the reason the embassy had been invaded in the first place is because of a video that had been released on YouTube featuring an American who was bad-mouthing Islam. And they got so angry in Benghazi that they destroyed the embassy. That whole thing was made up. She was talking about a video. The people in Benghazi had no idea what the video was. They weren't even talking about that. She said it was a spur of the moment reaction to this video, that there was no warning whatsoever, that the embassy was in any kind of trouble. That was proven to be false because guess what? Anytime somebody calls the State Department, it's recorded. So they had the recordings of these men begging her to send someone to evacuate them, and she refused. When she was asked by the Senate, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And she finally got to the point where she goes, what does it matter? It's already done. And that just, that was harsh. The American people were like, what do you mean, what does it matter? 4 people died because of your negligence. And that's going to continue to follow her until she dies. She was also found that she was using her personal email account for top secret communications. You're not allowed to do that while she was Secretary of State under Obama. So there were a lot of leaks coming out of the White House and influencing things going on in Russia. Russia had a full, like, open door into what was going on in the White House during her time as Secretary of State, because her emails were hacked because she wasn't using the proper account. And then when it was discovered that those emails were proof that she wasn't doing what she was supposed to do, she just tried to destroy the evidence by deleting her emails. She smashed her phones, and she used BitBleach program on her personal computers, all to try to hide the fact that she was in the wrong. She was also guilty of selling enriched uranium to Russia, but she was doing that as a Secretary of State. So she said, well, it's okay. I'm doing it legally. I'm doing it as a way of the United States trading with Russia. You don't give away enriched uranium to a group of people who have traditionally been our enemies. Your enriched uranium is not used for nuclear power plants. It's used to make nuclear bombs. And then finally, it was discovered she used her Clinton Foundation charity. It belonged to her and Bill and to their daughter, Chelsea, who is on the staff of the Clinton Foundation, supposedly running it and making millions of dollars every year doing so, that they were using the funds at the charity for their personal expenses, including several vacations and Chelsea's $1 million wedding. The top Republican contender for president was Donald Trump. He was a multi-billionaire. He was a respected businessman. He was a business owner, writer, TV personality, prominent member of New York society, the recipient of several civil rights awards, and former supporter of Hillary Clinton during her time as New York senator, until he realized that her work was terrible. And then he said, that's it. I'm leaving the Democratic Party. I'm sick and tired of the Democrats ruining my city, New York City, and my state, New York State, and I'm going to do something about it. And he switched to the Republican Party. So at that point, when he switched from Democrat to Republican, suddenly everybody who loved him and kissed his butt every chance they got suddenly turned on him and said, oh no, he's an evil, evil man. This is a man who won civil rights awards. This is a man who won awards for New York City because he created a lot of places where families could gather and have low cost to no cost opportunities to participate in, just being a family. The skating rink in Central Park was closed down for several years because the city of New York could not afford to fix it up. He went in with his own money and his own construction crew, and they fixed it all up free of charge to the people of New York City. It was a free gift to them. It was a multi-million-dollar project, and it was free to them. All of a sudden, all of these Democrats are saying all this stuff about him, and the media starts to turn on him. They were underreporting what was going on with Hillary Clinton, and they were over-reporting everything they could dig up on Trump, which wasn't a whole lot, but there were a couple of things. So, despite the assurances that the press that there was no chance that Donald Trump could beat out Hillary Clinton in the presidential race, he won the majority of electoral votes and became the 45th president. The media had lied to people all the way through this election that Hillary Clinton had it in the bag, that she had all the votes she needed, that nobody liked Trump, that everybody was really angry that Trump was even trying to run, that there was no chance he could actually win, that all of the states were really on the side of Clinton, and they started to believe their own lies. So when the returns came back, and Trump was winning state after state after state, the news media, professionals in the news media, got so angry. They were cursing on air. They were slamming things down on their desks. They were crying for crying out loud. They were so angry that their lies weren't true. They made them up, and they were angry that they were being proven to be lying through this whole thing. The people who believed the news media were also quite shocked because they were just like, no, but you told us that we had it in the bag. They didn't. Almost immediately, Almost immediately, the Democratic leadership began to call for the elimination of the Electoral College. How dare he win? It must be the reason because of the Electoral College. That's what did it. Okay, so the Electoral College is established in the Constitution. So if you look at all the blue states that are on this map, they have a smaller population than Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County is in red. See where red is? That little bit of Los Angeles County has a bigger population than all of the blue states that you see colored in. The Electoral College ensures that everybody gets a voice, not just people who live in these big cities and are considered coastal elites. People who wanted Clinton to win the presidency took to the streets in protest. They left a path of destruction in their wake. They left litter everywhere. They broke out windows. They broke people's car windows. It's just ridiculous. And the media began an immediate attack on the new president. And they're doing all this stuff and yelling and screaming about President Trump the whole time, saying, because he's a hater. It's like, oh, okay, whatever. There were some Trump scandals. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to. Okay, Trump was caught on audio joking about how women liked it when he grabbed them, and specifically in their crotch. The reporter he was talking to was also joking inappropriately, and he was laughing and joking around. The tape was 10 years old and was released only when Trump ran for president. It had been around for a long time before that, and nobody thought anything of it. But when he was running for president, they released the tape to tarnish his reputation. Now, he was joking around about doing this stuff. Now, I'm not saying he was appropriate at all. I think it was really gross. Some of the stuff he said was really gross and very, very inappropriate. He was saying it to another guy kind of in a joking way. That doesn't make it right, but he didn't actually do anything to anyone. He was joking about it, but he didn't actually do it. Are you with me here? Then an adult film star came forward, and she claimed to have had an affair with Trump while he was married to his current wife, Melania. He took her to court and sued her for defamation and won because it was proven that she lied about that. When a group of neo-Nazis, this is a big one, a group of neo-Nazis organized a march in Charlottesville, okay? Other people showed up to protest the neo-Nazis. You with me so far? So there's two groups now. But then there was a third group that was there, and they weren't part of the neo-Nazis, but they weren't part of the protesters against the neo-Nazis either. They were a third group who were there to protect from historical statues from being torn down, because those who were there to protest the white supremacists wanted to tear down the statues that belonged to Confederate leaders. So there were three groups of people here, okay? Donald Trump, when he was asked about the situation, what you gonna do about it? He said, okay. He says, the neo-Nazis, garbage people. Don't like them. They're horrible human beings, okay? But the other two groups, there are good people in both groups. You've got people who don't want their history torn down, and you've got other people who don't want white supremacy. There are good people in both of those groups. Now, he had already taken the neo-Nazi group out before he said there are good people on both sides, both groups. But the way it was reported, and the way it continues to be reported, is that he said there were very fine people on both sides. The media claimed that Trump was in support of the neo-Nazis as being good people. And he said, even though he had repeatedly condemned their actions, he said, no. They're garbage people. The other two groups are good people. Okay, because the media repeatedly took the president's words or actions out of context, he began calling them fake news, which really ticked them off. He especially targeted CNN because he caught them manipulating film for a really long time, including that Charlottesville video. They manipulated that quite a lot. They had reported high returns for Clinton up until Trump was elected. He was declared the winner. And then some of their newscast people cried, cursed, and, yelled. There have been some positives of the Trump's presidency. 4 million jobs have been created, not by him, not by the government, but by individual businesses creating jobs. Low unemployment as a result of that. There are more manufacturing jobs growing at the fastest rate in more than 3 decades. High economic growth. Unemployment at a 49-year low. Median household incomes the highest ever recorded. 3.9 million people lifted off food stamps. The ACA mandate was lifted. I can't remember what that is now. That's so sad. Now, as he did this, now we are going through a quarantine right now, and a lot of people are looking at this as, how are we going to bounce back? But our president is confident that we will bounce back. In fact, he has said repeatedly, we've bounced back once before, we are going to bounce back again. He's talking about this. He wants to see our country open up. He wants to see people safe, healthy, and able to live their lives the best way they can. And then finally, the rest of American history is totally up to you. You create the world you want by how you live, how you want to live, you create the world you want to live in by how you treat others. And I'm going to leave you with Matthew 22:37-40. And Jesus said unto him, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these 2 commandments hang the law and the prophets. I should say hang, not hand. Okay, that's it. We did it. I'm not even sure how many lectures I did today. I know I did a lot of them. But I wanted to finish the book. I promised I'd finish the book. I finished the book. I don't know how many of you were even watching this last one, but I'm going to say this to you. For the juniors who are returning to CCS next year, I wish you all the best. I think that it's a good school and it's worth going to, and I hope you do return. For the seniors, good luck in all of your future endeavors. If you plan to go to school, that's great. If you plan to get a job and work and get some training and find a job that way, that's great too. There's a lot of different paths you can take to success. I do want to encourage all of you to do the one thing I've been begging you to do for a lot of years. For some of you, I've taught you the whole 6 years you were in secondary classes, and I have made the same passionate plea to you throughout those 6 years, and that is learn how to learn on your own. It is really important, and you can learn a variety of ways. You can read, you can watch, you can experience, but you need to take the time to actually put yourself out there and learn to the very best of your ability. It's not about everything you just learned in school, because you're not going to remember every single thing you've learned over the last 13 years. We just gave you the base, the foundation, and the instruction on how to continue learning. It's up to you to continue that path. And having said that, especially to the seniors, it's been a privilege teaching you. To all the juniors and seniors, it has been a privilege teaching and learning from you. And this is my very last lecture for CCS. I am finished. This is my last year as a teacher at Calvary Christian School. So I will not be seeing you next year. But I wish you nothing but the best and brightest of futures, and I hope God blesses you in everything you do. Goodbye.